All right, so in this video, we're going to look at classification. So let me get a couple things squared away here and make sure we have a pen. All right, let's go with blue. All right, so a couple questions you want to be able to answer when we are done with this video. You want to know what the word taxonomy means. You want to know who helped set up the current system we use for taxonomy. There are 8 taxon levels, so we want to be able to identify those, kind of describe how general or specific they are. We want to know which 2 taxa are used to make the scientific name, and we want to be able to list at least one scientific name in the correct format. We also want to be able to use a dichotomous key, and we'll look at an example of one of those, but really as long as you can describe how it's used, we'll be in good shape. So taxonomy is this field in biology that deals with classifying organisms, okay? And when we're talking about classifying organisms, we mean organizing them based on their relationships. That used to be that we only looked at their appearance, and you'll find that a lot of the names that go with older taxonomy describe that appearance, and we'll look at some of those. The reason we need to have a system for taxonomy is because we have to, keep things organized, right? That's something that as a species, human beings are pretty good at, right? We look for patterns and we want to organize those patterns. And in taxonomy, we are categorizing living things. It means when we find a new species, we know where to put it. And if we, want to study a species closer, we can look at where it is filed in our little system. Now, Linnaeus is the individual who is responsible for the modern classification system. They lived in the 1700s, like 1740s, 1750s, when he did his work. And he called the system of groups taxa. Many taxa, one taxon. Each taxon is a level of classification. We use Latin in order to identify these taxa because Latin is a dead language, which means the meaning of those words are not going to change. And the overall structure is a hierarchy. There is a biggest general taxa, and then each taxa underneath of it gets more and more specific. So, the first taxa is going to include a very broad range of animals, but each individual taxa that we add to it gets narrower, until at the very end we only have one single animal that is classified in all of those taxa. There we go. 1. All right. So here are the 8 taxa: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Domain is a more recent taxon, but it's been around long enough to where most of the things that you see, if you look up an animal on like Wikipedia or something like that, you'll see the domain. Now, domain is the most general of the taxon, or of the taxa, excuse me, and species is the most specific. There's only one of each species, right? But there are many, many, many organisms underneath a domain. An easy way to remember this is Dear King Philip came over for great spaghetti. Okay, so domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Now, a way that you might see this when we're looking at relationships between different organisms is this kind of web. And you'll notice that domain would be above the kingdom as more general, but each time you step down, you can see, oh, okay, these 3 classes are related to each other by their interaction with that phylum, all right? Or these 4 orders are all related to each other by this class, okay? So when we talk about, describing relationships with names, that's the kind of relationship we're looking at, all right? Now, humans, this would be our full classification. Our domain is eukarya, which is all eukaryotes. So every organism on Earth that has a nucleus in its cells that is considered a eukaryote falls in the domain eukarya. Our kingdom is Animalia, which are the heterotrophs that move around. Our phylum is Chordata, talking about our backbone or our spinal cord rather. And this identifies the vertebrates. Our class is Mammalia because we're mammals, right? Our order is Primate because we have grasping hands. Our family is Homidae, which are the great apes. Our genus is Homo, which kind of goes between big brain and walking upright. And then our species is Sapiens, from the Latin word that means wise, and that's because we are intelligent. And so the one that you're probably the most familiar with is this genus and species, right? Homo sapiens. You've probably seen that before. And the system of just giving the genus and species is called binomial nomenclature. Binomial, bi means two, right? Nomial from the word name. So this is the two name. And then nomenclature, well, nomen again comes from name, and clature is system. So the two name naming system is binomial nomenclature. And this is what gives us a scientific name. There is a specific format we use whenever we write a scientific name. The genus always comes first and is capitalized. The species is always second and is lowercase. We either italicize it or underline it. It's kind of hard to write in italics if you're writing by hand, so we would underline it if we were writing by hand. But on like a PowerPoint, or if you're doing a journal article or something like that, if you're writing a paper, we would italicize the scientific name. So for human beings, we would say Homo sapiens, and you can see here, this is capitalized, the genus is first, the species is second, and we are in italics. Sometimes we abbreviate the genus with just the H, or just the first letter, the first capital letter, and put a period. That's okay too. Both of those you might see. So let's kind of take some organisms here and see if we can match them up to their scientific name based on just some common sense stuff. So we look at these three pictures. We have some kind of aquatic organism, right? Some ocean-going organism. We have a polar bear, all right? And then we have what appears to be some kind of plant, some kind of maybe an orchid. Now, looking at this, the first one should be pretty easy, right? We have kingdom Animalia, Animalia Plantae. Well, Plantae is probably the plant, right? The second one, right? So we're good on that. Now we have the difference in this bear and this octopus or this squid. Well, again, this is not a real brain buster. We just look at the phylum and we see Chordata, and we know that Chordata talks about the spinal cord. So this is probably the bear, but we keep going. We have Mammalia, right? The mammals. Carnivora, probably carnivore. Ursidae, which means or comes from bear, right? Like Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, the constellations, like the big bear and the little bear. Ursus, again, bear. And the species is Maritimus, from ocean, right, or sea. And I don't know if you know this about polar bears, but they spend a tremendous amount of time at sea or around the sea in the Arctic. So that's definitely our polar bear. And then, obviously, this middle one goes to the squid, but we can go through, or the octopus, whatever it is. We have an animal, true. Mollusca, like a mollusk, all right. Cephalopoda, so a cephalopod, which cephala means head, pod means foot, so the head foot, right, because they don't really have bodies. The order, and this is an interesting one, is Vampiromorphidae, so vampire-shaped. Family, Vampiroteuthidae, so vampire teeth. Genus is Vampiroteuthis, and the species is Infernalis, like the Inferno, so like the vampire hell tooth or vampire toothed hell would be the vampire squid right there. So it's pretty easy when you have all of this information about an organism to categorize them, right? We were able to look at these three and go, oh, okay, well, here's a plant, so it must be this one. Or in this case, we have, Ursus and a mammal, and we know that that's going to be our bear. And then that obviously leaves the cephalopod for our squid. So a lot of information can be gleaned from a list of classification taxonomy. Now, when we look at how we actually classify stuff, so like where do we get those names? Well, we're actually looking at the same relationships that we saw when we studied evolution. So we're going to look at their fossils, we're going to look at their anatomy, we're going to look at embryology, and we're going to look at biochemistry. And biochemistry is actually more of a recent thing, and it's led to some changes in the way we classified some things. Now, if we go back real quick and look at anatomy, you can see that all over the place here, right? So a spinal cord, right? So we know that a bear has a spinal cord. A mammal, right? That's not really anatomy, but talking about the organism there, right? But chordata definitely is anatomy. Carnivore, we're looking at its diet, right? If we look at the class here for the squid, the cephalopod, that definitely has to do with its anatomy. The Vampirotoothidae, that's talking about these grasping vampire-looking teeth. And the Infernalis, if memory serves, is because it is red, right? Like the Inferno. If we look at the plant, the monocot versus the dicot is a description of the anatomy of the plant, and the angiosperm compared to the gymnosperms is a use of anatomy in the naming. So that's a pretty common thing. Now, if you go into the wild, right, if you go on an expedition looking for new organisms, you may need to be able to tell new organisms from older organisms or organisms that have already been discovered, not older, like age-wise. So since it's pretty impossible to ask someone to remember all of the organisms that might be in an area, we use dichotomous keys in order to help us kind of simplify the process of identifying an organism. So in a dichotomous key, you're going to get two options at a time, and like kind of choose your own adventure sentences, and they will tell you where to look in the key to see if you have found a new organism. So here's an example of one. Let's say you were looking at some pants, okay? And let's say the first thing we tried to identify was not pants, but actually shorts. So look at question one, which has A and B, right? Article is a pair of pants. Article is not a pair of pants. Well, since we're looking at shorts, we would go to a different key, right? We would need, in this case, a pair of shorts key, right? Identifier shorts. Let's say we had a pair of blue pants, right? And had a button on them and a zipper, right? And there's a pocket, and there's a pocket, right? And yeah, there we go. So the article is a pair of pants. Yes, go to statement two. Okay, they are constructed of denim. Well, it's blue. We're going to assume that those pants are blue because they're maybe blue jeans. And so we'd say, yeah, go to statement three. They have a tag. All right, I don't see a tag on there. I see pockets and see a zipper, and I see, a button, but I don't see any tags. So we'd say no. So we go to B. Pants do not have a tag. Oh, these are expensive, right? Expensive jeans. And so we just follow the statements until we get to something that tells us, hey, these are expensive jeans. All right. Now, if we were using this to identify organisms, it would obviously be a much longer dichotomous key, right? Especially if you were looking at, say, let's identify sharks or let's identify bugs, right? You would need many, many, many more questions, but you get the idea. This is kind of how that works. So hopefully you can now answer these questions. Let me know if you need any help, and I'll be glad to give you an assist.